These days, it seems like everyone is looking for ways to save a buck. So, with that in mind, I've compiled a bunch of my favorite thrifted DIYs. So, grab your glue gun and some baking soda because it's time to get our DIY on.
I found this delightfully chunky candlestick at the local thrift store, but I just wasn't in love with the color. So I decided to go in with a bit of Rust-Oleum spray paint in flat black and give the entire thing a couple of coats. We start with this because I'm about to show you my favorite way to create faux enamel that looks so realistic. Once that black spray paint has had a chance to completely dry, go in with a little bit of white chalk paint. I'm just using a can of Rust-Oleum white chalk paint that I already had on hand, but really any chalk paint will do. And then just give that entire candlestick a nice coat of that paint and then let it dry. Now, while you're applying this paint, you're aiming for as little brush strokes as possible. I know it's impossible to get it completely smooth, just do your best. Next, go in with a damp, soft rag and give the entire thing a quick wipe, smoothing out those brush strokes and at the same time wiping it in certain areas till you get all the way down to that black spray paint. And here we have the finished look, and I just love the way that this turned out, but I'm dying to know what you think.
I absolutely love how this vase turned out. It often makes an appearance somewhere in our home, and all you're going to need is some baking soda and a secret ingredient.
Okay, for this first DIY, we're going to use a red vase. It's a beautiful tall vase, great shape. Not a fan of the color, but I knew that a little bit of baking soda paint, some baking soda mixed with some white acrylic paint, just mix baking soda with paint until I got, this time I wanted more of a consistency that was like super melted ice cream. I was going for less texture and more of a thin coverage. And so I just made sure that I covered everything from the little bit on the inside there where the red showed, the lip, and then all the way down. Then once everything was covered, I left it overnight to dry. The next day I went in with the same baking soda and acrylic white paint mixture and a chippy brush, and I applied a second coat to everything. This time really making sure to get in those brush strokes. That was the texture I was going for in this one, less of a stippling texture and more of a lined texture. So using that chipping brush, making sure I smooth out any drips, and then leaving that to thoroughly dry overnight. Okay, now you're going to want to head to the kitchen and grab yourself some cinnamon. Add a bit of the cinnamon to your already mixed baking soda paint. If you find that it's too thick, just add a little bit of water to thin it out. And then using a foam brush, you're just going to spread this baking soda cinnamon mixture all over the vase in different places. And then I went in with a nice big thick brush just to sort of spread everything out, working that back and forth. So really, there's no way to tell you how to do this. It's just what you like and what you think looks best. So just going in with the white baking soda chalk paint mixture and then the cinnamon baking soda chalk paint mixture, and then just blending those together and going back and forth until the vase looks the way you like it. And now you're going to grab that cinnamon and you're just going to sprinkle. You're going to want to do this over the wet paint mixture so that it sticks, and you're just going to want to sprinkle a little bit in and then take that buffing brush and just buff those cinnamon spots out. And then just keep working between the two paints and the cinnamon mixture, blending them in, adding color where you want it, adding more white where you want less color. And there you have it. I think a stunning faux stone vase. But what do you think? Do you think that it looked better red? I doubt it.
Okay, this idea is super cute, and it is especially perfect when my apples are ready on the apple tree as an ideal way to display them.
Here she is. She was never really that ugly. It's just she was starting to look a bit worn. The paint was getting kind of yellowy, and I mean, the holly thing is great, but it's not really my style. So I decided that this would look nicer as an apple bushel basket. To give this little beauty a refresh, I just grabbed a paintbrush that had bristles that were the width of each of the weaving slats of the basket and some white chalk paint. And I just applied a couple of coats. I thought about spray painting this, but I wanted to keep the original wood color that was inside. I thought that the paintbrush would get in better in the parts where the weaving met. Didn't go heavy-handed with the paint on this basket and focused most of the paint and the layering for the part original painted image was, so that that would be completely covered up. Although it's a bit difficult to see in the video here, if you look closely, some of the paint had rubbed off of the original basket, and I wanted to keep that light wood popping through just a little bit to kind of give it that aged, worn look. Looked for some napkins that would have the motif that I was wanting, but unfortunately I wasn't able to find any. So instead, I took a sheet of white tissue paper and some printer paper, and then I cut slits on the corners of each of the tissue paper and then carefully folded it up over the edge of the printer paper, and then using several pieces of tape, taped that down really well so that the tissue paper laid completely flat on the printer paper. Then using one of my printables found in my At Jenny's Place printable library, I printed out the image onto the printer / tissue paper. And then once the image was printed out, just simply take a pair of scissors and cut away the printer paper from the tissue paper. And then once you have just the tissue paper, again using a pair of scissors, cut as close to the image as you can get so that there's just a little bit of the tissue paper around. And then you're just going to need some basic Mod Podge. I like the matte. You could use the shiny, but I think for this look the matte would work best. And then using a paintbrush, the same paintbrush I used to paint it, so I knew it would fit the wood slats. Paint on a nice thin layer of the Mod Podge to the section that the tissue paper will cover. Now, once you lay this tissue paper down, you cannot move it again. So make sure that you get it exactly where you want it and that you carefully place it down. Do this bit by bit. So do the first layer of the tissue paper, smooth that out, then lift it back up. Taking your paintbrush again, apply another thin layer of the Mod Podge onto the wicker basket, and then gently press the tissue paper back down onto that section, and then just keep continuing like that until you have the entire image adhered to the front of the basket. And then once you have your tissue paper lying down flat and it's slightly dry, go in with a little bit more of the Mod Podge and apply it to the surface. Using my Cricut scraper, I just gently pressed where the slats meet alongside the tissue paper so that I wouldn't rip it, but that it also would lay flatly to the surface. There you have it, the perfect apple bushel basket. So I just, again, thrift store find. I found this old, and I think it's like a cookie jar or something. I don't know. It's ugly. Whatever it was, I thought it was ugly. I again opted to use baking soda paint because it would add a lot of texture. And then I just took that outside once the baking soda paint had dried and gave the entire thing a couple of coats of just some flat black spray paint. Now it was time for some fun. Using Artmine's chalk paint in copper, one in a very dark navy blue, a little bit of watered down white chalk paint, and a stippling brush, I just went in and went to town, adding little bits of color here and there, bit of dimension on the bluer color. You'll see in a minute. I went light. I didn't want it to stand out too much, so I didn't go heavy-handed on that. And also with the copper, I just wanted touches of the copper. But between the two, it just really creates a lot of interest on this piece. And then to lighten everything up as I'm going along, you're just going to want to take. I used one of my chalk painting brushes. You can use whatever brush you have on hand, but you want one that's sort of thick and pounceable. And then I also, at times, if I found it went a little thick, would add a bit of water. So here's that blue color, the blue chalk paint I was talking about. It's a very rich, deep blue. Used a very small stippling brush. Just wanted to add a little bit of the blue, but again, I didn't want to go too heavy-handed with this color. I just wanted to add a little touch. And then just to finish everything off, I used a little foam brush and some of the black onyx in folk art chalk paint and added touches of that here and there on the places that were more pronounced. And there you have it, the finished look.
This is one of those times where I bought one from the thrift store and really wished I'd bought them all. I am in love with the way that this turned out, and now it sits in my kitchen year after year.
I came across these wood, I don't know what they even are, bowls. I'm not sure, but there was 2 of them and I really regret not buying both. But I did buy one, and I just took some white chalk paint to really give it a distressed, softer look than the really harsh dark wood. I just went in with a chippy brush, getting all the sides, the back, every little detail. Then using some hot glue, I took a picture fastener. I just went with the hook kind and adhered it to the back of the wooden, I don't know, what would you call this? What would you call this? What do you think this is? I truly don't know what this is, but it turns out brilliantly. Okay, to finish it off, you're going to want to add something decorative to the clip. So you can use a picture, a family picture, to hold recipe cards. But this time I thought I would just go with something pretty. I grabbed a piece of drop cloth and a stencil that I got from Dollar Tree. It has 2 pretty birds on it. And then using a stenciling brush and a bit of decoupage, I put some decoupage on it to begin with so that the paint wouldn't bleed. And then I followed that up once it was dry with a smaller stenciling brush and some black chalk paint in onyx. I believe it's Art Minds. I didn't want it to go on too thickly. I sort of wanted it to look kind of worn. And because I was just using an inexpensive drop cloth from Dollar Tree, I decided to paint on a little bit of decoupage on the ends so that it would prevent them from fraying too badly. And then I just had some clips from lights from Dollarama or Dollar Tree a while back that I just spray painted black, put a little bit of white chalk paint to make it fit in with the rest of the motif, and then hot glued it to the center. And that was it. Such simple little changes, and yet it made a world of difference, and I just love this in my kitchen. I just used a candlestick that I'd found at the thrift store. Now, the candlestick that I purchased, it was like a metallic color, and I wanted to deepen that a bit, so I went in with some antiquing wax. And then I just started randomly placing bits of chalk paint in trellis gray, sort of in different areas on the candlestick. You don't need to be too picky with this. Just place it where you want it. Now you want to make yourself a baking soda paint. So you're just going to take some white acrylic paint, inexpensive acrylic paint, you can often find it at the Dollar Tree, and some baking soda, and just mix that up into a cup until you end up with a consistency that's like super soft, melting soft ice cream. And then once you have that consistency, you just start applying it to the candlestick. I used a stippling brush because I find that and a chippy brush can add a ton of texture when you're working with baking soda paint, and I really wanted a lot of texture on this. So I went back and forth between a paintbrush, a chippy brush, and just sort of added as much texture as I could, letting some of that trellis gray and some of the darker brown color to show through. Then I just simply popped in a battery operated candle, et voila!
This idea will show you how you can easily turn all types of items that you can find at the thrift store into beautiful candle decor.
For this thrifted DIY, I found this beautiful ceramic bowl, faux stone looking ceramic bowl at the thrift store. I loved its scalloped edges and simple monochromatic look, and I knew immediately I had to turn this into a candle. I added a couple of wick sticky dots to the bottom of my wicks and added that to the bottom of the candle, making sure that they were centered in line and not too close to each other or too close to the edge. To keep the candle wicks standing upright when I poured in the melted wax, I just used a pair of chopsticks that, we always get when we order in Chinese food, and I keep them exactly for this purpose. To my double boiler, I added a bunch of my candle wax and started to melt it slowly. I am not an expert candle maker in any way, shape, or form. I'm really just a bit of a newbie, so if I can do this, you can do this. But basically, you want to melt your candle wax until it reaches around 190 degrees, and let the melted candle wax cool until it was around 175 degrees. And then I added my essential oils, stirring very carefully so not to add any air bubbles. And then I gently poured it into the ceramic bowl. And trim your wicks, et voila!
Admittedly, this DIY was a happy accident. I was actually going for that melamine look that we kind of did in the candle, but as you're about to see, it went in a whole new direction.
Here is the vase in its original state, and I just went in with some flat Rust-Oleum spray paint and gave the entire thing a couple of quick coats. Now, I had originally planned on doing a faux enamel look that I've done before and love, and it works well with my decor, but things went a little sideways. When this happened, hubby said he once talked to one of the paint ladies at Home Depot, and this is a common occurrence. It looks like someone bought the paint, painted whatever it was they needed to paint, filled it with water, replaced the lid, brought it back to Home Depot, and got their money back. Home Depot, not knowing this had happened, put it back on the shelf and then unknowingly sold the defected paint to me. Has anyone else ever had this happen? Now, I bought this paint a long time ago, so it was way past the point in which I could return it. Luckily, this happened to be a blessing in disguise. I got so frustrated with the way that the paint was applying that I took my paintbrush and stabbed at it, and oh my goodness, I love the way this looks. It created this like faux marble look on it that I'm obsessed with. And so instead of fighting it, I went with it. I did switch out though my flat paintbrush for my old trusty waxing brush just to give it that texture while pouncing up and down on that really saturated chalk paint. Now, I can't exactly tell you to go out and buy a bulky can of paint. So what I can tell you is just add water to your chalk paint, and it stands to reason that you should end up with a similar look. Wanting this to have a shine to it so that it looked like polished marble, I decided to go with the clear glossy Rust-Oleum top coat instead of the matte. I'd originally planned matte for the enamel, but this beauty, she deserved a little bit of shine. I found these plastic plaques at a thrift store recently, and I like their shape, but I wasn't really a fan of the color, and the plastic looked cheap. To fix this, I was going to need some white chalk paint, and because it's my color, a bit of teal. This is Art Minds chalk paint in antique teal, and I'm just going to apply that to the outside frame of each of the wall plaques. And then I'm also going to add it to the little bits that are sort of in between the decal that's in the middle. I want this to look like the decal is sitting on top and is a separate piece from the frame. Once I had that all painted, I let it dry overnight. I want to do a crackle finish technique to the paint on the frame part of this, so I'm going to use some Elmer's glue to do this. This is a super easy technique anyone can do. You just want to take some of your glue and a paintbrush and just put a thin coat of the glue on top of your initial dried paint. Now you want to let the glue dry a bit until it becomes tacky, but you don't want it to completely solidify before you apply your next coat of paint. So I'm going in with the white chalk paint, and I'm working in smaller sections, fully applying a nice thick layer of the white paint over the tacky glue. Okay, now this is when the magic happens. You're gonna want to take your heat gun and you're gonna want to use it to dry the paint, and as the paint dries, it will start to crackle and just add tons of texture. Now I also wanted to make sure that I got those little bits that I had painted teal, so I just went in with a bit of the glue and then over top of that applied the white paint, and then just did the same thing with the heat gun. Likewise, I applied the same glue and chalk paint technique to the sides of the frame, and then went in with that heat gun, warmed everything up, and made those magical crackles appear. To finish everything off, I wanted to make that medallion look like it was wood that had been distressed paint. So I went in with a fan brush and a little bit more of that white chalk paint and gave it a distressed look. In my humble opinion, these no longer look cheap, but you let me know what you think in the comments below. This DIY is rustic meets sparkle. I found this pampered chef pedestal and this gorgeous wood bowl and decided that I wanted to try to put the two of them together. To do this, I was going to need some E6000. Now, admittedly, I went a little too heavy-handed with the E6000, got a little carried away. I didn't really need to use this much. I really only needed to put a little bit around the rim because that's really the only place that ended up touching the bowl. But oh well, live and learn. So I placed the bowl on top, and then I placed a couple of my 10-pound weights, hand weights, inside the bowl just to apply some pressure between the glass bottom, the glue, and the wooden bowl, and left that overnight to cure. And here you go. Tell me, what do you think?
Just to let you know, the little one who got this basket really loved it.
I found this adorable Santa basket at the thrift store, and we're just going to add some of that red paper filler that you can get from Dollar Tree. I also found this toy doctor kit for under $5, and I also found this puzzle that will help her learn the names of the different types of transportation. I found both these items at Dollarama, but you can find similar ones at Dollar Tree. Both of these toys were about the same size, so I wanted to prop the doctor kit a little bit higher than the puzzle, and this is super simple to do with those Zots. Now, Dollar Tree and Costco often have books at really reasonable prices, but the little one I'm putting this basket together for speaks French. So this winter-themed Robert Munch book in French is the perfect addition for this basket, as is this Crayola colored hot chocolate mix I found at HomeSense, but again, this is an area where you could definitely save money. Dollar Tree has these Laura Secord hot chocolate mixes that would be the ideal addition to this basket. I decided to add to this basket this adorable little two-piece outfit that I found for $24.99 at Marshall's, and I loved that it came with this beautiful velvet red purse with a little bow on top. I know she's just going to love playing with that, and it kind of adds a little extra bonus gift to the basket overall. And since chokables are a factor, I'm going to add a few extra chocolate Santa Clauses and use some of those Zots to strategically place one of the Santa Clauses and a Christmas bauble for that extra special touch. Pop it into that gift bag, use some tape to seal the opening shut. The ribbon came from Michael's, bought it on sale during their winter sale last year. To make this bow, you're just going to start by forming 2 loops. That's going to be the smallest loops for your bow, and you always want to keep that good side facing down, so when you make your second loops, twist it in the center so that your good side is facing down. Then form your second loop a little bit bigger than your first loop, and then bring it back to the center, twist that ribbon again, and then form the other side of the loop, again a little bit bigger than your first one. Keep doing this until you form as many loops as you want, and then just cut it off from the rest of the ribbon roll. Pinch the center together, and then using a chenille stemming, just twist that around to hold everything into place. Decide how long you want your tails to be, and then cut off a piece of ribbon in one long length. Fold this in half and then twist it in the center so that the 2 good sides are facing out. Then attach it to to your bow by flipping it so that the good side is facing down, and then using that chenille stem, twist those tail ends in place. For an extra festive touch, I decided to dovetail the ribbon ends, fluff up your ribbon loops so you end up with a nice full bow. And then this time for that extra Christmas embellishment, I decided to use this sparkly donut that I found. I loved how sparkly it was and that the colors totally fit the theme of this basket. And if you ask me, it's a perfect example how an inexpensive thrift store find can elevate your gift baskets to a whole new level. Fell in love with these candle holders, but for $50 for a small one and $130 for a large, there was just no way I was going to pay that. When I saw these in the Pottery Barn catalog, I knew immediately what I needed from the thrift store to make them. So a quick trip to the thrift store was all that it took to find 3 of these gorgeous casserole-shaped dishes. Then using some chalk paint, folk art chalk paint and oatmeal, I mixed that in with some baking soda to make a thick paste. You're basically going for the look of soft served ice cream when it's slightly melted. And then once you've reached that consistency, taking a stippling brush, I find that adds the best texture when you're doing a really textured baking soda paint, and just stippling that baking soda paint onto your casserole dish. Now I did 2 different color paints. I actually did oatmeal and then I did another one in milk jug paint. They both turned out really nice. So it really, the color you choose depends on you. Whichever color is going to suit your decor, that's the color you should do. Now for the larger casserole dishes, I just went in with a bigger, this is actually one of my chalk paint brushes. And then although I don't have a video of it, my bad, I did go in later with a chippy brush just to add a bit more texture because that thick brush didn't really provide the kind of texture that the stippling brush would give. Now here's a little tip. If you need to leave your paint overnight to let your piece dry, just stick it in a Ziploc bag, but don't leave the paintbrushes in like I did. It's not a good idea. I shouldn't have been so lazy. And then the next day, use that paint that you left in the Ziploc bag to apply any needed second coat. It really shouldn't need a full second coat. If you put it on really thickly the first time, it should just need a little bit of touch-ups in places, especially paying attention to, the rims and the edges of the casserole dishes, just filling any spots where maybe you see some color. And then there you go. I am constantly finding these little wooden trays at the thrift store that are too small to be used for any type of serving. I found this one for $1.99, and then of course my percentage off coupon. And I decided to make this into a Christmas wall art. So I started off by going in with a bit of Folk Art 1 Decor paint in aged pine. And I applied this to the rim of the tray, the little spindles in between, and then the outer edges of the tray and a little bit on the inside. Now I didn't go all the way to the center with the green because I was going to be later on painting over that part quite thickly with some white paint. So I only did the edges, and then I did do 2 coats. And then once that had dried completely, I went in with the white chalk paint and I covered the entire tray with the chalk paint. However, along the edges and the rim and the outside rim, I went in with a very chippy, distressed look. I didn't want to go in like thickly. However, in the center part of the wood tray, you do want to go in with quite a nice thick coat of that white paint. You don't want any of the original tray base colors showing through. While your tray is drying, you're going to want to grab yourself a piece of printer paper and some white tissue paper and cut down the tissue paper so that it's about 1/4 of an inch passed around the entire printer paper. Tissue paper has a shiny side and a matte side. You're going to want to print on the the matte side, so make sure that when you're taping your printer paper to the tissue paper, the shiny side is against the printer paper. Cut a small slit in each corner so that it meets up with the printer paper corner. Hold each of the edges up, and then using several pieces of tape, adhere the tissue paper to the printer paper. Trim off any tissue paper overhang at the corners. I quickly and easily created a pine tree image on Canva and then printed it out on my printer. Without a doubt, this would work better with a laser printer, but mine isn't. It's an inkjet printer, and you can still do this. Just make sure that you let the ink on the tissue paper dry overnight. Leaving the tissue paper adhered to the printer paper, using a nice pair of small scissors, cut out as closely as you can the pine trees. Place the image exactly where you want it, working from the base of the trees. Using a small paintbrush, apply a thin layer of Mod Podge to the bottom of the tray, and then gently place your image on top, pressing down ever so gently with your fingertips. Then flip the tissue paper image back up, apply another thin line of Mod Podge, and do those steps again until you have the entire image on the tray. Let the Mod Podge dry, and then once dry, go in with a nice thick fluffy paintbrush and more Mod Podge to apply a nice gentle thin coat of Mod Podge to the top of the image. And then go in with a heat gun on low to warm that image up. Now that's going to get your paper to lay flat. It's going to warm up the Mod Podge underneath while drying the Mod Podge on top, and it's just going to make everything come together nicely. I think this came out looking like a holiday painting, but I'm dying to know what you think. To give her a little bit of a makeover, I went up in with some Art Minds chalk paint and a big thick fluffy brush, and I just kind of went in with a distressed look. I didn't want to cover all of the dark underneath. I wanted some of that to pop through. I didn't want the metal handles anymore, so I painted those white as well and let that dry, and then I just went in with a little bit of Art Minds and a stippling brush and gently applied some of that wax to the handle, giving it a little bit of a rusty look. I found this wooden Christmas tree with some deer table decor at the thrift store. I have seen them at the dollar store before though, and I just popped it off. It was really easy to get off, just a little bit of wiggle. I'll show you right here with this deer. You just wiggle it back and forth and it just comes out of that groove so easily. I'm going to save the deer for later on. I'm also going to save this little wooden piece with the grids in the between because I think that could come in handy, and I do have a really good idea to use these with, but we're going to save that for later, and we're only going to work with these 5 pine trees. I don't love, but I don't hate the painting on the trees. I actually want to use the back side where it has just a natural wood grain, and I want to emphasize that wood grain with a little bit of antiquing wax. So I just went in with a foam brush and a bit of that antiquing wax, and then wiped away any of the extra wax with a slightly damp soft face cloth. Give these pine trees a little bit of added interest and a touch of winter whimsy. I just used a bit of that white chalk paint and a fan brush and applied a light coat of distressed looking paint. To adhere these wooden trees to the front of the wicker basket, I just went in with a little bit of Lepage wood glue, and I didn't do a very good job of showing me doing this, but I just applied it to every surface in the back that was possible, and then I went in with my hot glue gun and applied a line of hot glue on each of the trees. And then I used this to adhere the pine trees to the front of the basket, with just the tallest one tipping over the top just a tiny bit. There really wasn't a good way to clamp this down, so instead I just placed a couple of heavy books on top against a wall and then just let it sit there until it glued down. And here you go. Here's the finished basket. I put some pine cones to make it pretty. At #real-life, this is actually just going to hold the claws I cleaned my dog's feet with. Were these 2 larger clamshells with holes in the middle, and I knew instantly what they wanted to be. So to recreate this, you're going to need 2 larger shells with a hole in the middle, some wooden beads, some white chalk paint, some blue chalk paint, and some antiquing wax. Oh, and some twine. You're gonna need some twine. Next, you're gonna wanna grab some wooden beads. I'm just using some wooden beads I got from Amazon that have no coating on them, and I'm picking them out in various sizes. Then I'm popping a few into 3 different Ziploc bags so that I can add a bit of antiquing wax to one. And then you're just going to want to seal that bag closed and then mush those beads around in the paint. This is so much fun. Aside and then do that with the second bag, but this time you're going to go in with some of that gorgeous navy blue color and again seal that shut and then just mush them around. That wasn't enough excitement for one day. You're going to do the same thing to the white paint. Now, once your beads have been thoroughly smooshed, you're going to want to lay them out to dry. So I would recommend just getting like a piece of saran wrap and laying that down. Grab yourself a cup, place your Ziploc bag in the cup and fold it over so that you can easily access these with a wooden skewer. Just stick that wooden skewer in the middle of each of the holes of the beads and then lay that out on your saran wrap to dry. You're going to want to do this for each of the 3 colors. Now, I found that once the beads had had a chance to dry, the blue ones especially were just too solid in color. To make these look a little more worn and old, we're just going to rub them against some sandpaper and wear away some of that blue paint so that you end up with something that looks a little bit more like this. I also decided to give the white ones the same treatment but skipped doing the ones with the antiquing wax because they didn't really need it. Okay, now we're going to make a tassel. I just grabbed this shell kit I had because the box was about the right size, and using my twine, just wrap it around whatever item you choose about 25 times and then slip the twine off of your object. Next, you're going to want to cut a piece of twine off the original twine roll and use this to tie all of your twine loops together with a double knot. And once you have all your twine loops in place, you're just going to want to cut the opposite end to where you've tied it. And then going in again with those scissors, just trim that tassel up so that all of the twine strands are the same length. Okay, find that knot that you tied and then flip your twine bundle on itself so that the knot ends up at the bottom and the 2 end twine pieces end up part of your tassel. Grab your pair of scissors and just stick it through the top part of your bundle just to make sure there's a little hole there. Next, cut off a smaller piece of twine and wrap that around your bundle. Grab the tassel end that is furthest from you and bring that to the center of your tassel bundle and then lift it so that it's coming out the top. And then grab the other end of the twine that is closer to you and start wrapping that around several times. Once you're satisfied with the amount of twine wrapped around, grab that tassel end that you had sticking out the top and tie it to the end that you've been wrapping around. And then just simply tuck that knot in behind the wrapped twine with a pair of tweezers. Decide on how long you want your bead garland to be and then cut down your twine to size. Stick that through the hole at the top of your tassel and then double knot it. Next, collect all your painted beads. Here they are, all worn out and looking fantastic. And then to keep things organized, I would recommend just taking the time to lay out your pattern. Now, when you tied those twine ends together, you're going to end up with a shorter end. Don't trim that off. Right here, you're just going to stick it in the middle of the bead so that it just sort of becomes part of your bead garland. And then I just started to string those beads on one at a time in the pattern that I decided I liked the best. And here's a little tip. If you find that your ends of your twine start to fray and it's too hard to get it through your bead ends, just do what you used to do when you were a little kid and your shoelace would do that. Grab a piece of tape, wrap it around the end, trim it down with a pair of scissors so that you get a pointy tip, and then this will make it so much easier to stick that through the bead hole and make your threading a lot quicker and easier. Now, when I reached the end, I changed it up a little bit. I didn't put any blue beads kind of close to the shells because I thought it would look a touch garish. Now it was time to string on those seashells, the whole reason we're here to begin with. I started with the smaller seashell so that it would sit on top of the larger seashell and finished it off with a double knot. And here you go, the final look. I totally want to know what you think. Personally, in love with this. For this next DIY, we're going to use this wooden crate that I had already upcycled from the thrift store. I had some leftover cardboard from another DIY that I had cut down to size so that it would fit inside the crate, and then I painted it with some Art Minds antiquing wax and then distress paint it with a bit of white, and then added those cardboard pieces into each side of the wooden crate and then popped in some floral foam. Now that way you couldn't see through this crate, which meant that I could put in the floral foam and you wouldn't be able to see it. And I loved this crate because I loved the detailing, and the white distressed paint just made that detailing pop. Crate is white. I wanted to go with nice, bright, vibrant colored faux blooms. So I collected a bunch of different bright pink peonies, roses, what else is there? There's hydrangeas, and I think there's even a few dahlias thrown in. And I just started to arrange the flowers, working with the taller stems in the middle and then working my way down on the sides so that it kind of tapered off. And there you go. I think that this arrangement just looks so delicate and beautiful and pretty, and it was so cheap to make.
If you enjoyed that, make sure you subscribe. Give me a thumbs up. If you hit that notification bell, it'll let you know the next time I upload. Oh, and you might enjoy these.